So now, please come to the stage first, the panel speakers and moderator, or just, okay. So, just I introduced Jonathan. He's a moderator. So, Jonathan is, as the governor mentioned, my successor, and everybody knows that before joining to the IAIS, he's leading IAIS EXCO members for 9 years. And he is extremely active. And for last 2 months, it's a so-called transition period between Jonathan and myself. And I was extremely enjoyed this transition period because my strategy is all complicated work ask Jonathan to do. So that was very nice. So Jonathan, please come to the stage.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's very good to be here at this annual conference. And thank you very much, Yoshi, for those kind remarks. I must say it has been a very pleasurable transition 2 months. It's been wonderful working side by side with you in this period. And I'm very honored to take over from you and to build on the very strong foundation that you have laid, and to build on this foundation and help to support the further work of the organization at this very exciting time when the association has demonstrated yet again its ability to come together and to find joint solutions to our common goals, which Vicky will share a bit more with us. And I look very much forward to working for each and every member of the association and finding ways that the IAIS can support you in your task of protecting policyholders and promoting global financial stability. And I also very much look forward to working with all stakeholders in finding in even more transparent ways that help instill even greater confidence in our decision-making processes as the IAIS. Now, I have been invited to moderate the first panel, which is on the exciting topic of looking to the future of the IAIS and the global supervisory landscape. But before kicking off with the panel, as Vicky mentioned, we have a session that talks about the very near future, which is around developments on how we have come together again as an association on a path to take forward our work on capital standards, in particular the implementation of the Insurance Capital Standard, ICS version 2.0. And I invite Vicky to the stage to tell us more about that. At the same time, I'd also like to invite to the stage some of our executive committee members, in particular Vice Chair Hiroshi Ota from the Japanese Financial Services Authority, Gabriel Bernardino, Chairman of IOPA, and Ted Nickel, President of the US NAIC, to come to the stage to share this announcement. So, Vicky, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Felix Hufeld and Peter Brown, my co-participants on the panel, for accepting to shorten the panel so that we could make this announcement. As you know, in June we published ICS version 1.0 for extended field testing. This was an important milestone and one that we are proud of. However, we are also acutely aware of the fact that the industry and stakeholders around us were looking for greater certainty of what ICS version 2.0 will be, when it will be, and what implementable means. So my announcement has to do with that. The executive committee made a decision today that ICS version 2.0 will be conducted in 2 phases. First will be a 5-year monitoring period during which ICS version 2.0 will be used for confidential reporting to group-wide supervisors and discussion in supervisory colleges, creating a common language across supervisory colleges of IAIGs and across time during the monitoring period. The ICS will not be used as a prescribed capital requirement, i.e. as a capital requirement that if one breaches, one has supervisory consequences, and therefore not for a basis for supervisory action during this monitoring period. This ICS version 2.0 for confidential reporting will contain 2 equally important components. First, mandatory confidential reporting by all internationally active insurance groups of a reference ICS, which is based on a market-adjusted valuation, the standard method for capital requirements, and converged criteria for capital resources. Second, additional reporting at the option of the group-wide supervisor, additional optional reporting of ICS based on a gap plus valuation and or an internal model-based capital requirement calculation. This is the first phase, the monitoring phase of confidential reporting. The second phase will be implementation of the ICS as a group-wide prescribed capital requirement. Also, the IAIS is acutely aware and has been discussing with the NASC and the Federal Reserve and the Federal Insurance Office their willingness to develop an aggregation-based group capital calculation. They made this important announcement, very important for their own regulatory regime earlier this year. So the IAIS has agreed in parallel to its development of ICS to collect data from interested jurisdictions in an aggregation-based approach. Through this data collection, the IAIS aims to be in a position by the end of the monitoring period, by the end of phase 1 of ICS version 2.0, to assess whether the aggregation method provides comparable, that is, substantially the same in the sense of our ultimate goal, outcomes to the ICS. If so, it will be considered an outcome equivalent approach for implementation of ICS as a PCR. By reaching this agreement, the IAIS will achieve its aim of creating a common language for supervisory discussions of group solvency, while maintaining a carefully considered stepwise approach towards convergence to the ultimate goal. I think this announcement also reflects the priorities of members and reflects also our willingness to maintain our unity towards that goal. Thank you very much. Some of my colleagues might wish to offer comments. President Nico?
Thank you, Vicki, and good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to thank the governor for hosting us here today and for your thoughtful, provocative, and insightful comments. It was very heartwarming, and your city here is just a tremendous place to visit. So thank you for hosting us. Secondly, I want to really call out and thank Vicki. As I did yesterday, for your leadership, as well as the membership of the ICS task force for their leadership in helping us reach a way forward as reflected in 2.0. It's a remarkable accomplishment, and it would not have been achieved but for the very, I would say, English fortitude and Greek perseverance you capably demonstrated. Did I cover it all?
There's a bit of Spanish there.
Oh. See. There's a saying that it's always darkest before the dawn. In fact, there's another saying that a Senator McCain from the United States often says, it's always the darkest before it goes completely black. But we'll go with the first one, and it's always darkest before the dawn. And I know all of us involved in the process during that robust and often passionate debate and dialogue over the past few months had our dark moments as we tried to resolve these challenging issues. But with 2.0, we have our dawn. ICS 2.0 reflects some very important elements. It recognizes the ICS as still a work in process, and which will continue to evolve. And in positioning the ICS 2.0, a monitoring tool for now. IAIS now has the time we all need to further develop the ICS toward its ultimate goal, including continuing to use GAP and other methods to further refine the end product. Importantly for the US, we have introduced our aggregation approach into the IAIS and gives us a path and a pretty significant responsibility to move forward with regards to its comparability to the ICS and recognition as equivalent outcome. That's really, truly remarkable progress. I'd also certainly like to acknowledge the contributions of our other Team USA members, including the Federal Insurance Office and the Federal Reserve, in helping us make the case for aggregation recognition. 2.0 represents a lot of give and take, and I'm thankful to all the EXCO members who saw the value in finding the way forward as presented in 2.0. I also very much look forward to the day when Gabrielle Bernardino fully embraces aggregation once our work is finished.
You better wait to see.
It'll be a cold day in Kuala Lumpur, right? The path ahead is still uncertain, and I have no doubt there'll be a few rocky bumps at times, but 2.0 ensures we'll still, the journey will still be with all of us at the table, all IAIS members contributing. Again, the NAIC and state insurance regulators are grateful to all the EXCO members for their openness to our ideas and look forward to continuing to be a part of this important work ahead. So with that, thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts.
Thank you, Ted.
Can I?
Yes, of course.
Well, first of all, I'd like to echo Ted and Vicky for the gratitude to our Malaysian colleagues to host this wonderful meeting. I am very happy to be here. And this week, we had a very intense debate, intense discussion regarding this ICS. And of course, our view, each member of the view of each members and the opinion of each members had a very different. Of course, it has a very good reason because we all have a different economy, different society. So I think we started from a very different standpoint, But finally, we have achieved a great accomplishment today. And from Japan's point of view, the gap plus is, for our point of view, is important, and we are very happy that gap plus, together with internal models, considered to be the viable options for inclusions in the ICS by the end of the monitoring period. And as I said, we are different from different jurisdictions, but our aim is the same, which is to help insurance industry to be more sustainable, to be more stable, and to be more resilient to risks. And I'm very happy that all of the EXCO members not stick to small views, but rather take the holistic views, not backward-looking, but forward-looking, and achieve an architecture which is quite future-oriented. Thank you.
Yep. So thank you very much. And of course, first of all, let me really thank our Malaysian colleagues. For me, it's the first time here in Malaysia, and I've been here all week, and it has been, I think, quite an impressive host. So thank you very much, and it's really appreciated. Of course, I'm also very happy that that following these difficult discussions during this week, that we found this agreement, the way to go forward, and especially because I really believe we needed some clarity in this discussion, and clarity for us as supervisors, but also clarity for the industry, because of course there's a lot of work that have been put on in terms of the development of the ICS. And I think we were arriving a point in time where clarity was needed on the way forward, and I think we are achieving definitely that clarity. As Ted mentioned it also, of course, when you have an international agreement in this sense, nobody's happy, which I think it's a good indication that probably we're going in the right direction. And at the end of the day, I think that I'm pretty sure, ladies and gentlemen, that in a number of years, when we will approve the final ICS, we will remember what I can call the Kuala Lumpur Agreement as a major breakthrough in the development of an ICS that we all want, of course, to deliver the stability of the insurance market globally, to deliver the protection of consumers. As Hiroshi mentioned, of course, we have different countries, different realities, different sensitivities, different regimes, etc. But I always have really the pleasure in the IAIS to bring people together. When people work together, face to face, with strong discussions, of course, hard, difficult, but when we do that and we have really the common goals of protecting policyholders and having a stable market, we can do sometimes miracles. And I think that this is definitely an important breakthrough, and an important breakthrough also for one thing, because of course ICS it's a fundamental piece. We believe in this comprehensive international regulatory framework, but as the governor mentioned in his intervention, that I really appreciate, we have more and more also common challenges, but also opportunities for the insurance sector that we need to devote attention. We need to really look at innovation, digitalization, also the challenges posed by the huge protection gap that is out there with the climate change that is moving as we see, and the impact that this has, of course, throughout the world. These are challenges, but are also opportunities for the insurance sector. And so I really believe that by having a sound and strong and credible international capital standard, we can position the insurance industry internationally to really be a big help to all of us as a society to overcome these challenges of the protection gap and of the savings gap. This, I think, it's very, very important to have a credible and sound regulation from an international perspective. It is there for the benefit of policyholders, but also, I truly believe, for the benefit of the industry. And I really hope that the signal that we're giving it here today also, that reminds me a little bit the motto of the European Union, if I may, in this case, which is united in diversity. And I think this is something that we could embrace also internationally. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to say that we intend to issue a press release with a written statement that sets out what I said earlier. Thank you.
So excellent news. Thank you very much. And at this point, can I call up the other members of the first panel? For Mr. Peter Braumüller, our executive chair from 2008 until 2004, and also managing director of the Insurance and Pension Supervision at the Austrian Financial Market Authority, Peter. And Felix Hufeld, the next executive chair from 2014 to 2015, and currently president of BaFin. And of course, Victoria Supporter, who you all know well, current ExCo chair and executive director of Prudential, of the Prudential Policy Directorate at the Bank of England. So, very wonderful to be here on this first panel. It's a very exciting topic with the title of Looking Beyond the Status Quo, IAIS Leadership Roundtable on the Future of the IAIS and the Global Supervisory Landscape. And it's wonderful to be joined for this session by an extremely experienced panel. It feels almost Dickensian or Charles Dickens prose, but instead of talking about the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and yet to come, we are talking about the executive committee chairs, past, present, and secretary general yet to come. So this should make for a very good discussion. As you said, very appreciative that we've eaten into the time a bit, but I think it was very important to do so, to share this news hot off the press around the progress we've made on ICS and what it means for global insurance supervision. So the plan is, in the hour that we have left, is to really talk in two segments. The first talking about emerging trends, risks and opportunities that are happening in the insurance sector and what that means for insurance supervisors. And then in the second part, moving to what does that mean for the IAIS, for our agenda and our future role going forward. And I think let's really jump straight into it. But maybe before starting to look at the future, I think it is always useful to reflect on what we can learn from the past. And we do have the benefit of good institutional memory with us here today. So perhaps I could start with Peter as our past chairman to talk about what lessons we can, as the IAS, learn from the past that will help us to think about the future. And in particular, Peter, you were IAS chair at the time of the 2008 global financial crisis. And what did we learn from these events in 2008 that should help us to shape the future?
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for being here. And I think after having heard these accomplishments of today, it might also be quite relevant to look back a little bit. It's not so long ago, but it seems quite long ago. And I have to say, yes, I was the chair at the 2008 peak of the financial crisis. I agreed to do that in August, did not know what will happen in September, and we met in October. And I tried to, I thought, how best can I describe what has happened? And I found out it's 5 more or less phases. The first was shock. It was a complete shock what happened, and we didn't know is this the beginning of the end, of the complete meltdown of the financial system. We were really extremely worried what happened over there. Particularly then, we also realized this with AIG. Also, a major insurance group was kind of in the spotlight for whatever reasons. We come back and we can discuss that. And so it was a complete shock, and it was crisis management. So it was facilitation of side meetings with supervisors to organize information about what has happened together with the industry, representatives of the companies. Then the second phase, of course, was when we had the first job was over. Then it was, of course, questions from the outside and questions to ourselves. The question, what to do next? The question, has the crisis to do something with insurance supervision, with insurance? What should we have done better? Do we have a lack of standards? Do we have a lack of implementation of standards? Or do we probably have a lack of supervision, of enforcement of those in practice? And are our standards appropriate? Do they cover the right things? So identifying that the IAIS is not the global supervisor, not the global supervisory authority, but the standard setter, but of course responsible that we look for the implementation of the standards as well. Third phase was then, let's identify some of the issues, of content issues that were at stake. Of course, it was this big animal that came in the room of systemic risk, materialized. It was a kind of cross-border issues. It was a question of cooperation among supervisors, about effectiveness of colleges. It was about appropriateness of standards. I remember in the FSB we looked at the observance of standards and principles of jurisdictions that were in the very center of the crisis. And most of it was green. Dark green for fully observed, light green for largely observed. So we had to pose the question, it might be is the standard, are it the right standards, and this type of stuff. And then, and I describe phase 4, and then I will then quickly come to the lessons learned, or the very few items on that. But I think that is, has been, at least in the past, very typical. It was a phase of skepticism. So we knew the items, but then the question came up and people said, insurance is not systemic, full stop, that's it, we know it, so that's right. We need not fix what is not broken. AIG is not an insurance case. Insurance supervisors have done a very good job in the past. Let's congratulate ourselves for what we have done. We do not need any global capital standard. And we repeatedly heard that from different sides, yeah? So to be honest, and I try to be a little bit critical to see that not always, there's a long way to the accomplishment. And that brings me to this long way, because then there was this action. And the action at the end was, I would say, quite significant. It was the starting point of CAMFrame, and also in the first stage, we didn't know what to do exactly, so we called it New Focus Task Force. And only after 2 years, we found out that this type of CAMFrame, this international framework for these international groups would be nice, would be a good idea. We started our systemic risk work, I would call it rather macro-prudential work, and we strengthened the ICPs for the 2011 revision, and we started work on the macro-prudential area, which has developed quite a lot with GMAR and the key risk and trends analysis. Very briefly, I know we have only 1 hour left, and just a few things from that. This is 5 stages. I think we could, of course, shorten some of them easily, whereas for others we should take the time to really think And a few of my thinking is we need to identify risks and trends very early. And Vicky made the point in our general meeting on these 3 pillars. So everything has 3 pillars. We have not only standard setting implementation, we have also this issue of new risks, new emerging risks. We should not be just an organization having standards for just resolving bankrupt or nearly bankrupt companies. We should really be forward-looking. We should not say this is only a banking issue. We should take a minute and think, could it also be an insurance issue, a relevant issue for us? We should not say what went wrong. We should ask ourselves, what could be wrong? What is the risks that we are facing to act early? We should think of probability, not of impact, not only probability. If we've seen there is significant impact of financial crisis and that can have. We need thoroughly analyze what to do, but then we need to act ambitiously and really without losing unnecessary time. We need a feedback loop, I think, between the standard setting, the implementation, and what I will call the supervisory effectiveness in practice. We need really to have this feedback loop to understand, are we setting the right standards? I was puzzled when the governor said the lifespan of regulation is becoming shorter and shorter. We should avoid that we do ICP supervision now every half year or standards every time. So we need to come back to what is really the basic, and might be the things is just to help them on new risks. And this intensity and effectiveness of supervision, I think a lot can be still done on that. I think for the first, that would be some of the lessons I would learn.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks very much, Peter. Now, Felix, if I could turn to you, because in a way you inherited, some of the issues that started in Peter's term, and in particular, you were chair at the start of a number of major reform projects by the IAIS, particularly around the area of promoting global financial stability. So I'm thinking of the early work on the ICS, the work on a response to the topic of systemic risk in the insurance sector, very early thinking on an activities-based approach to mitigation of systemic risk. How do you view the direction of travel now with a couple of years progress, the direction of travel, particularly on dealing with these financial stability risk issues?
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, actually, just listening to what Vicky and Ted and Gabriel and Yoshi said before on ICS, just changes everything which I was prepared to say when I came here, because I was widely committed to say a couple of very strong reminders and banging your heads together and saying, don't forget the mission, why you're here for, and continue the path on ICS, which continues to be the #1 goal of everything the IAIS is doing currently. Not the only one, but it's clearly the #1 goal. If you talk to other regulators in other sectors, particularly in the banking side of things, it is close to unexplainable why the global insurance regulatory community has not yet delivered a capital standard. Let's not forget that. You're not alone here. You're just one sector of a variety of financial sectors. So it would have been an unforgivable mistake of not having made progress. So I congratulate the executive committee under Vicky's leadership and everybody who contributed to that. It's a major, major progress, and I'm particularly pleased, of course, that the famous ultimate goal formula, which I had the pleasure to establish a couple of years ago, has not been broken. It is fully intact, and the commitment, which I just heard a couple of minutes ago, on continuing the process of convergence, which is the key on working against that ultimate goal, has not just been kept intact, but has been reinvigorated, which, from what I could hear, based on a really honest and technically sound commitment. So hats off. That's a very, very important. And whether it's the Kuala Lumpur formula or something else, I don't know, but it's a tremendous step forward. Everything else would have been complete failure, which is not part of the genetic code of the IAIS. In fact, another positive story which I can testify in looking at the other sectors, which is part of my current role, as you may know, is one of the biggest strengths the international insurance community has is the ability to come to terms and a very strong sense of, so in a way, community. In my view, it's compared to the banking sector and the security sector in particular, it's the strongest sense of community. This is a huge asset which you should all sort of keep in mind and leverage on, since you just have done that, so I can sort of skip that very quickly. But I think it's something which you tend to forget in day-to-day work. I think it's an enormous. That doesn't mean that everything is fine every single day. It's heavy debating, heavy struggling, very difficult technical work, but at the end of the day, it's step by step moving on. And you know what, I mean, myself and other colleagues on the banking side, we tried very hard to postpone agreements on Basel III, you know, just to make sure that the insurance people are quicker than the bankers for a change. But, so you made it, because the jury is still out, as you all know, whether or not Basel III will find an agreement or not, which in itself is a huge challenge. So well done. Now, the other big legacy, which Peter mentioned, and Jonathan, you alluded to as well, is indeed the quote-unquote discovery of systemic risk as a legacy of the big financial crisis. Indeed, that has been vastly underestimated prior to the crisis in all financial sectors. But I think the IAS has done well to be a little bit stubborn, to resist pure copy-paste approaches from one sector to the other. So I would encourage the IAS to stay stubborn in a way, because you're a global standard setter for the insurance industry. And that's more than just picking up what has been developed in other sectors. Not everything, you know, it's a thin line between an attitude which says, don't call me, we call you. I mean, there are some similarities, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. But on the other side, just copy-pasting what's been done on the banking side is entirely wrong as well. So I applaud the IAS on approaching a so-called activities-based approach, which in my personal opinion, as some of you may know, is probably the more appropriate methodology to tackle systemic risk. I do not rule out the possibility of specific institutions being per se systemic. That's not my point. But my hypothesis has always been that the result of that gigantic effort to develop an entities-based GSI methodology, just yielding a handful of names, is a little bit of a methodological waste of time. There are more appropriate approaches to capture that systemic risk more specifically, and I think the work which has now been established within IAS is a good one, and I cross fingers that it will, like the ICS work, yield results in due course. It's a big task. It's a very important task. And funny enough, now sitting in the Financial Stability Board, now if you listen to the general perception there, some two to 3 years ago, we, meaning the insurance regulators, had been banged, and why have you not adopted the banking approach? Today, the general tone is very much around when do you deliver the activity-based approach? So again, it's good to be a little bit stubborn on the insurance side as well, so go ahead.
Thanks, Felix. And Vicky, turning to you. So you are, of course, building on the foundations which Peter and Felix have built. What would you say are the strengths coming out of the past? Well, it's really coming up to a decade of hard work since 2008 that have armed the IAIS to deal with the future.
Thank you, Jonathan. Indeed, I am standing on the shoulders of giants. But let me even go a little bit before 2008, actually, and say that I think more generically, and it's a point that both Felix and Peter had made during their tenures, and one that I fully prescribe to. I think a very big strength of this standard-setting body is its inclusivity, it's its breadth, that we seek to deliver value and to learn from all our members. It's not a G20 institution, unlike the Basel Committee, unlike the FSB. Now, historically, since we were formed as an association, we gradually started delivering value to our members, first through supervisory exchanges, and then through the delivery of ICPs, and then through an observance process and self-assessment process of the ICPs. And I was very pleased to hear from the governor as part of his very thoughtful speech, actually, that Malaysia, for example, at some point benefited from the development of these ICPs. So these remain very, very important tasks, and very important tasks to me in allowing insurance markets across the world to develop and flourish, whilst having an anchor on what looks good. And I think that the insurance core principles continue to be important, and we revise them. Equally important is our efforts to leverage from other institutions to deliver capacity benefit, capacity improvements. And this is an area that you, Jonathan, in your previous roles have done a lot about. And earlier this week, I signed an agreement with Tom Terry of the International Actuarial Association, and Peter, actually, but in his capacity as chair of the Access to Insurance Initiative, with the aim of delivering actuarial capacity training to supervisors across the world. So all of these remain very, very important tasks. We need to deliver value to all our members. However, the big change since 2008 is the understanding that we need to be relevant to the system as a whole, which also includes the biggest firms in the world. I mean, essentially 50 firms are more than half the market of internationally active insurance groups. And collectively, surely, if they're not supervised appropriately, and if there isn't appropriate supervisory cooperation and a common language, they can create systemic risk. So the launch of ComFrame and the launch of ICS is basically an incredibly important foundation. I should also say that I have spent most of my career as a central banker, as an economist. I'm a member of the Basel Committee, etc. And I came into insurance later in my career. And one thing that I have learned from this experience is that you cannot have a macroprudential or a systemic approach to any sector if you don't have the foundation of macroprudential is a microprudential regime. It's basically ComFrame. It's basically the ICS. You cannot start putting overlays if you don't have the foundation. And in some respects, a capital framework, a supervisory regime, captures all firms, and therefore it's system-wide from that particular perspective. So I think I see ComFrame as the foundation to our contribution to global financial stability and to the broader membership, including the G20 constituents. And we need to deliver on that. In terms of the overlays above the foundation, I share Felix's view that we have always believed as an IAIS of what makes the insurance sector systemic is particular activities that generate maturity mismatch, liquidity risks, and leverage. And it's these activities that we need to be focusing upon. And we need to deliver on those commitments. I mean, today's announcement on the agreement we made on what an implementable ICS version 2.0 is a milestone. We have a lot of work to do to define precisely what the reference ICS is going to look like, what the definition of capital resources are, all the specificities that go to ahead of our consultation in 2018. We also approved a paper on an activities-based approach. We need to issue it. We have a lot of work to do, but we are in a path where we are delivering value to all our members. Not, as I said this morning in the AGM, not every member will find each one of our priorities useful to them, but I want every member to get value from something that we have prioritized. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Well, I think it's now time to maybe put pull the crystal balls out to some extent and look a bit further beyond into the future. And if I can ask each of you perhaps to what you see as maybe the two or three most significant trends, risks, or opportunities within or impacting the insurance sector, and what challenges these present for insurance supervisors. I encourage you, we don't have to do it too sequentially. Feel free to treat this as a bit of a conversation and jump in if somebody says something you really want to add to. But perhaps I'll ask Felix to kick off.
Happy to do so, and many thanks, Governor, for your speech, because I can pretty much echo a couple of points which you already made, maybe just framed slightly differently. If I would have to point to three megatrends, which I don't believe are the only megatrends, there are more than that, but let me just focus on three of them. One is increasing volatility, which we have to cope with, which is particularly relevant for an industry which is based on the notion of long-term liabilities and long-term investments. So in a way, the regulatory mismatch between ever quicker changing markets and a certain degree of unpredictability and, in a way, safety within what we call insurance is a massive challenge in the most fundamental sense. The second megatrend, which I see, is obviously digitalization in all shapes and forms, which in itself will, I think it's a second or third panel which will look at that more intensively. But if there is any particular industry which might be shaken in the most profound sense, it is the notion of pooling risk and the law of large numbers, which will be changed, to say the least, by means of digitalization. And the third is something which you, Mr. Governor, called ethical standards, which I would call the emergence of conduct regulation in a more technical language, which probably refers to similar things, which is another way of saying that the level of tolerance in any given society, which may vary, of course, from society to society, but in general, the level of tolerance on what types of products and the way how such products are being delivered to the people changes profoundly. 25 years back, to be a little bit black and white, it was good enough to not outrightly cheat people. Today, the level of expectations on what you have to deliver to get it right is a fundamentally different regulatory environment. And that is a megatrend. And you may say, I've said it many times, so I know how you feel about that, that this is not really new for insurance regulation because policyholder protection has always been front and center of insurance regulation. That is true. But trust me, if you look at the latest developments, which are clearly more driven by securities regulation, but spill over into the insurance world as well, is indeed a fundamentally different level of what I call conduct regulation, which goes beyond consumer protection, actually. It's much more than that. So get prepared for coping with that field of regulation, which is quite different from what we are traditionally trained and good at, which is prudential regulation. So that is a third megatrend, which I think will take much more time within IAIS in the future. So there are more trends, but I think those three are particularly relevant.
Excellent. Thanks. Maybe Peter, and maybe I will free rein to you and Vicky. But what I would like to ask you to maybe pick up on, given that fintech is a big theme of tomorrow, particularly, is this issue of opportunities and risks. So, Peter, I know you, as Vicky mentioned, as chair of the Access to Insurance Initiative, will be quite aware of opportunities of fintech for financial inclusion, also as the governor mentioned. Vicky, but we also have to think about the risks, and cybersecurity being a big one of those. So free rein, but if you could pick up on those two themes, it would be good.
Vicky, go first.
Well, I mean, I will pick up on cyber, but before I do so, I very much appreciated Felix' kind of mega trends. I think another mega trend, which is particularly relevant in the Western world, is the potential pressures that might come to the regulatory community from the quest for higher real productivity gains and higher real growth to combat some of the problems, the economic problems that we have been facing, which is stagnant real wages, which are according, of course, to some commentators, probably are consistent with the rise of certain political movements that might lead to deglobalization and less opportunities to share. And to us as regulators, this is pressure from politicians, particularly for prudential regulators, to deliver through our regulation other objectives than our traditional ones, presents a risk and a careful balance, because our job always needs to balance prudential policyholder protection, systemic risk, whilst at the same time not killing the sector that is delivering the pooling of risk. So I see that as more of a threat rather than an opportunity. Digitalization and fintech and insurtech provides huge opportunities for lower costs and to the consumer, and huge opportunities to the economy. But it produces, as the governor said, very, very complex and new arrangements, and a potential interconnectivities between companies, not through the traditional routes of common assets, common exposures, the financial routes that a lot of us understand, but through other operational routes, such as dependencies to common IT providers, which brings me to cyber threats and cyber security. I mean, every day in the news, I mean, there were news even in this country yesterday. There are news about data breaches, there are news about cyber threats, there are news about systems coming down. And to be frank, as Felix said, regulators, particularly prudential ones, know what good looks like in terms of standards for financial risks and traditional operational risks. You kind of know what good looks like in terms of solvency standards, in terms of governance standards as a supervisor when you go into a firm. Do we really know what good looks like for cyber resilience? Do we have standards that we can understand globally, let alone individually? Do we really know what we seek when we go into a firm about its operational resilience? Have we really mapped the interconnections? I don't think we have yet. There is a lot of work going on cybersecurity, including at the FSB, G7, etc., G20, and other standard-setting bodies like the Basel Committee. I think this is an area where the IAIS has a big role to play for our sector, for traveling the journey of developing what good looks like.
May I take up? I think I add one, and then I want to make some comments on that was already raised, because I think I need to add climate change as well, because I think the more I think about that, the more worried I get about it, not only because on the first sight events, like natural catastrophes, coverage, the question whether big data will then exclude certain risks for the future, what will the political response be to that, but also all these developments in the direction also of carbon dioxide reduction, of having cars, no longer petrol cars and diesel cars in 20 years or so on, that will significantly change also the complete, I think, parts of the economy, the question of assets, of carbon-related industries and this type of stuff. I want to say these megatrends are really big challenges for us because they have so many aspects in them. And I think we did a good start in the IAIS to at least start to deal with some of them in a very good way on issues paper, application papers, to start to deal with them. What was mentioned was consumer protection. I think we need to find the right balance between different types of consumer protection, between consumer protection in our understanding as policyholder protection more generally, versus consumer protection of favoring parts of the policyholders against for the disadvantage of the collective at the end of the day, and this type of stuff. What could be a danger as well. Of course, the issue of higher growth, of the question on how much is insurance industry put into playing a role by politicians in that respect. The digitalization, of course, as well. And that brings me to, Jonathan, what you asked. I think part of these new technologies is a foundation for expanding towards inclusive insurance, towards improving the access to insurance. But we need to be very careful on that. We have meanwhile also seen the negative side, thankfully not in a big extent, But we need to be very careful. We need to explore new areas in that respect on interaction with non-regulated entities, with mobile phone providers, with digital technology companies and this type of stuff. So it is a big opportunity, but we need to carefully think about what in addition is needed. Again, I think we don't need new standards. We need to find the right approach to the standards. Finally, I think Felix pointed out on these issues of also operational risks and that coming up. I think that makes it more and more difficult to get more this type of low probability, very, very high impact type of risks, where it's very difficult to I think we need to put more emphasis on risk management than in that respect with the traditional approaches.
Yeah, just a quick add-on to Peter's point, which I fully agree with. If Peter talks about developing new standards, that's of course entirely correct, but that will have to include, in my opinion, the scoping of regulation to start with. In my mind, it is quite clear in looking at new players, let it be startups, let it be established so-called big techs, which today are unregulated. If we will see trends that de facto certain types of risk sharing, mutualization of risk will migrate into the hands of today unregulated entities, whatever that is, I think it's our responsibility as regulators to make proposals to expand regulation. So I think applying new standards must include the notion of reshaping the boundaries of regulation, including second-level risk, which Vicky alluded to, which indeed I think we will find much more often than not in the future, that sort of first-level outsourcers we still may know, but how about second-level or third-level? You know, if everything ends up in the hands of IBM, sort of in an offshore center in whatever, Malaysia, we should know about that. You know, do we have the tools in our hand today to even know about it? The answer is no. So how can we become the regulator for IBM? Of course not. But we will need reshaped toolbox to get our head around stuff like that.
No, that's great. I think that's giving a lot of food for thought. I'm a bit conscious of the time because I do, if possible, want to leave a bit of time at the end for some questions. So let's turn quickly to what all of this means for the IAIS and our strategy and our role going forward. And perhaps I can start with you this time, Vicky, because in many ways these are your challenges as chair. And maybe how your views on how or tell us how the IAIS is going about thinking through these issues and building a strategy to tackle them, and where you think the IAIS should be going.
I'll try to be brief. I think that the core strategic aims of the IAIS are structural, and we're not going to stop being the standard setter, the global standard setter for insurance. We shouldn't stop spotting emerging risks and devising strategies for tackling them. And clearly, we should not stop implementing and assessing our standards, because then what's the point of developing them? So I expect that these are going to remain core to our mission for the years ahead. What needs to change and what we need to be nimble at is our strategies in delivering these three core aims. And we need to reprioritize, look at what our members need, look at the environment outside, and try to be nimble, which is difficult. It's difficult in an institution which is based on 3 international meetings, physical meetings, a year of its executive committee and several telcos, where its members are sitting all over the world. Technology helps there, but it's difficult to be nimble. We need to learn how to become nimbler. We have shown ability to adapt, including through some of the examples we covered recently. But I think being nimble and looking ahead, not chasing the problems of the past only, will be very important. And that's what I call thought leadership. Thank you.
And Peter or Felix, any quick things to add?
Just one quick component following up on the discussion we had on digitalization. In the automotive industry, you know, in traditional automotive industries, you had thousands and thousands of mechanics who had to be employed to get a car well built. Now, for a number of years, a new professional profile has been emerging, which is called mechatronics, which reflects the fact that today a car is much more sort of a miracle of software and things like that, as opposed to pure mechanics. Now, what are the mechatronics of insurance regulation? What types of profiles will we need in not just regulation, insurance companies themselves, of course, as well, in 5 years, 10 years down the road? Whatever the answer is, I think what everybody, including the IAIS, will have to, although being nimble, have learned to embrace is technological knowledge. Because without it, I think we won't be in a position to generate impactful regulatory standards. There are no easy answers how to do that, but one way or the other, we simply have to manage to get this embraced into our work.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, as a final word on also this inclusiveness of the IAIS, because I think Vicky pointed to that. I think that's quite important, and we have just heard about ICS 2.0. I think what we need to, there are two aspects in that. The first is, of course, to really actively include all our members in what we are doing. That means to give them the possibility to do so, and also to transfer the value added that we create with that, what we are doing. And I've often heard, and that's sometimes forgotten, that supervisors in emerging markets told me and say, look, we are also interested in very good IAIG supervision because we have a lot of subsidiaries of those big groups in my country. The same goes for the systemic risk. Per definition, globally systemic means you have a global, potential global impact on the economy. So that's quite important. And I think we also need to progress, and we have done some really good progress in the area of the implementation. I think that's quite important, and to support those. I'm always most frustrated if I meet people who want to do that and just can't do it because they have lack of resources, and we are on the way, and we will continue to find, I think, intelligent ways of supporting all of them. And this is one of the achievements which is there, but needs to go on in the future, in order that we can really harvest the outcome then.
Fantastic, thanks. Well, I'm going to open up for some questions now. We've had some great thoughts, but I know it was probably stimulated some questions amongst you, all of you sitting there as well. So luckily, everyone, I think, has a microphone next to their chair. If you would like to ask a question, if you could first briefly introduce yourself and then ask your question. Anybody like to go first? No takers. There we go. Fiona.
I'll kick off if you like, Jonathan. Fiona Stewart from the World Bank. So I have a follow-up question to where Peter left off, really, in terms of the ICS debate. A lot of the countries we work in are interested in the Solvency II, and how can we get to Solvency II? What do you think the ICS and these announcements you made today mean for the emerging market supervisors?
Is it directed to me? Then I would say the clear advantage is that we will have a global standard, we will have a global benchmark. I mean, still Solvency II is a very well-developed system. I shouldn't say otherwise, under control of my chairman. But still, there are many other systems around the world, and I think what we should clearly say is that we also should help in implementing this global standard. There's a long way still to go on developing that in the shape, but then the next step is helping to implement. Of course, that is very late, but that is how long it takes, because I know some of those are eager to understand what they can do for their purposes. But following our discussions is certainly also helpful for those markets, in my view.
And just to add to that, I mean, we will be publishing and fully specified first component of the ICS version 2.0, which, you know, for supervisory college monitoring. So I do hope that everybody in the world looks at it, and if it's looking to consider developing new standards, takes that specification into account and the evolution of that specification into account. It will be available for all to see.
Yeah, and if perhaps if I can add just a reflection, I had the benefit of traveling with Yoshi, in fact, in over the past month or so, to visit some of our members in the Asia region. And there was a very clear message there, actually. It was that they are looking to developing their risk-based solvency systems, but they are really hoping to build it on a basis that is not a regional, you know, copying a regional system, so something that's not necessarily Solvency II, which has obviously been one of the clear examples to date, but neither necessarily a US RBC. They really want and encourage the IAIS to develop something which is a global standard that they can look to as they think through their own reforms, and they look to something that is not overly complex, and that can be applied in a proportionate way as well. So that I think are those are, I think, are the objectives, talking to the broader membership, that we need to bear in mind as we carry along this path. Any other questions? Okay, I see Mr. Lebega there. If you'd like to introduce yourself to the rest of the members.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to thank the panel. I am the regulator in Uganda, and at the same time, the president of the Association of Organization of Insurance Association in Africa. Looking beyond the status quo, I know you are aware that many of the emerging markets need their voice to be heard, and mostly at the executive. Is it possible that that item is looked at by expanding the representation of the emerging markets, because many of the challenges of the executive members might be different from what we see as emerging markets? Thank you.
Yes, one of the activities that we have agreed, that the Executive Committee has agreed to undertake starting from January next year, we had a preliminary meeting actually earlier this week as well in Kuala Lumpur, is to develop the association's new strategic plan and financial outlook. The old one is completed by 2019, and we need to start thinking about the new one. And indeed, part of the exercise that we will do to do so involves some blue sky thinking, including mega trends, including whether we've got our priorities right. Very much along the lines that I spoke about before, which is I doubt whether people want to change the core mission and the core aims, but people will need to, will have views about the strategies. Now, once we've developed that as part of the mandate of the task force that is developing the strategic planning and financial outlook, the sort of next 5-year plan, if you want, we have also agreed to look at membership issues across all our committees. Because of course, we need first to look at strategic priorities, at a strategy for the year, and then see how our membership matches that. So we will be doing it as part of this. And within that particular task force, we are seeking members of EXCO and other IAIS members, and we'll be very keen to maintain geographical balance amongst our members. So I really encourage our members to think of applying because this task force is going to be discussing very important issues.
Thank you very much. And just to add that, if there are any members who are particularly interested in joining this task force, they can contact either myself or Andrew Stolfi, who is our Chief Operating Officer. I think I know there was a question up front here as well.
Okay. So my name is Abdullah, and I'm from the Capital Market Authority, the insurance regulator in Oman. The panel has mentioned cybersecurity as a trending issue in the coming years. Now, when it comes to cybersecurity, there is a lot to do as far as building capacity in the member organizations of the IAIS. My question is, what would be the role of IAIS in terms of building the members' capacity to face this trending issue? Thank you.
I'm happy to take a first stab. This is, I mean, really, this is you point to an issue that's going to be very much, I suspect, a topic of our strategic planning process in the coming year. I think the answer, in a sense, is that we do need to have a multi-pronged approach. Yes, as was mentioned as well by the governor, we have, as a global standard-setting body, I know our members do look to us for guidance in terms of standards, and we have some existing work that has been done in this area. We've had an issues paper. There's work on further application material and what it means for the ICPs. But that's only one part of it. Increasingly, I think supervisors want to understand how do they take these principles, these standards, and apply them in everyday practice. How does it impact their day-to-day work? And so this is something which we are increasingly thinking about focusing on in terms of support for exchange, peer exchange, and learning from each other about best practices in the area of supervisory practices, and having both these channels for exchange on best lessons, but also providing some capacity building around that. And when it comes to the capacity building, our strategy is very much to partner with experts in this area. So we have various partners on capacity building. In the area of financial inclusion, for instance, we partner with the Access to Insurance Initiative. on stability issues and other parts of our standards. We've partnered with the Financial Stability Institute within the BIS. And so I think I anticipate that this is going to be part of our strategy, is building platforms for supervisory exchange on good ideas to deal with this, but also finding ways that we can provide the actual capacity building support as well. I don't know if you want to add.
Just to add to that, and this is from my supervisory experience back in the UK, as I sort of mentioned earlier, I don't think we yet know what best practice is, let alone be in a position to promulgate it internationally. I mean, first of all, the approaches undertaken by different supervisors are different. There isn't kind of a stable best practice approach to operational resilience more generally and cybersecurity as well. So at the moment, we are sort of at the gathering information stage. Different authorities are doing different things. I mean, the standard setters and regulators that are a bit more advanced in this area of cybersecurity are actually payments regulators, which is natural. So we will be doing our best, but don't expect that even if we could, we know the answers. And this is an area where we need to get to know the answers.
Just echoing what Vicky said, I think currently we are not yet in a stage where we can talk about best practices, but developing a practice. And that's already something, because in most places there's none. In my home country, in Germany, we just enacted supervisory standards and expectations on IT security management for banks. We are now replicating that, not copy-paste, for the insurance sector, which I expect to come out sometimes maybe mid or third quarter next year or something. We are feeding that in, of course, into international bodies, and we are very happy to share the experience we are gaining right now. And it's very much a learning curve. It's not yet a best practice, but it's a practice with the IAIS with respect to the insurance sector. And then we have to go from there. So I think this is truly it's interesting, you know. The more you look at digitalization, let it be on the cyber risk side of things or more on the strategic side of things, the gap between developed and emerging countries narrows down quite a bit, because the situation we are in is much closer to each other than what you might think, which is an interesting experience, actually. So we are very happy to share that and see so we can accelerate. It's about managing a learning curve currently, all over the world.
Just a brief comment on that as well, just as an indication, not just give the impression that we have to wait. I think we can also, based on the standards we have right now, on risk management, so if they want to move their business model towards more digitalized, to question them much more as a supervisor. So I think I would just encourage that at the same time when we are going to develop the kind of the benchmarks that we expect them to do, we should not refrain from challenging new business models, going towards a certain direction where there's really sufficiently sound risk management accompanied to that.
Great. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. And I really, in a way, hope that this has all been recorded because this has been incredible food for thought, particularly as Vicky pointed out, as we move into our 5-year strategic planning exercise next year. I think for the task force members, this might have to be compulsory viewing to get a starter on this exercise. So I want to thank the each of the panelists very much for the rich thinking on this. And if I may, as well, just on a personal note, as someone who in a former life spent 8 years on the executive committee of the IAIS under the leadership of, in fact, each of you, very big personal thanks for the inspiring leadership of this association. And I very much hope to be a good custodian of all the good work that you've done. But thank you very much.
Thank